Olá, espaçonauta! Galera, o Alfredo não para de trabalhar não, viu? Deixa eu contar para vocês aqui. O Alfredo mandou para nós aqui uma pequena reportagem falando aí são reportagens, esses materiais são da CGTN, que é um canal de TV que ele é semi-estatal, né? Ele é bancado pelo governo chinês, né? Canal bem bacana, a gente sempre traz a maioria das informações que a gente tem aqui, que eu tenho divulgado para vocês, muita coisa aqui é direto da CGTN, né? Ela tem uma comunicação direta com a CNSA, que é a Agência Espacial lá da China, então está sempre divulgando para a gente. E o Alfredo traduziu para a gente uma reportagem onde um porta-voz da missão CHANG'E6 falou sobre a quantidade de amostras e tal. Muito bacana a gente ver isso. Eu até usei algumas imagens nos nossos vídeos recentes, mas o Alfredo fez a tradução da matéria aí, que foi exibida na CGTN, que eu vou colocar para vocês aqui agora. E também, essa matéria é bem curtinha, tá? Ela tem menos de 2 minutos, mas eu vou emendar aqui um programa chamado Agenda da TV lá da CGTN, que conversou com vários especialistas, é uma videoconferência com vários especialistas falando dos aspectos e da importância da CHANG'E6. Vale a pena porque é recheado de informação. Então vocês pediram para que desse continuidade a isso aí. O Alfredo está de olho, está fazendo aí para a gente aí essas traduções aí, bacana demais. Então, Alfredo, mais uma vez, meu amigo, muito obrigado, viu? Vou te falar. Produção sua aí, incrível, e a colaboração e o trabalho de uma envergadura e enriquecendo o nosso conhecimento extremamente. Muito obrigado, viu, Alfredo, por tudo isso. Galera, agradecer ao Alfredo aí, porque assim, Alfredo faz esse trabalho aqui pro canal, traz isso e manda isso aí para vocês aí, de maneira gratuita. Ele não recebe nada por esse trabalho, tá? Ele faz para colaborar mesmo. É uma pessoa abnegada, desprendida, que ama e é apaixonado com ciências. E ele traz isso aqui com o maior prazer para a gente, e eu tenho o maior prazer de colocar aqui no canal para vocês e agradecer ao Alfredo aí mais uma vez. Vamos lá então? Bacana demais, não perde não, hein?
1,935.3 grams. That's the weight of the historic lunar samples collected from the far side of the moon by China's 53-day Chang'e-6 mission, the first ever in human history. Now the samples have been handed over by the China National Space Administration to the Chinese Academy of Sciences for storage, analysis, and research. Near-side lunar soil is typically described as fine and loose, while the far-side samples appear visually distinct. This difference fuels scientific excitement, raising hopes for potential new discoveries about the moon's formation and history in upcoming analysis. Both Chinese and international applications for the lunar samples are on the agenda.
China has been holding a positive and open attitude towards the international application for the lunar samples in order to effectively promote the international cooperation in lunar and deep space exploration and sharing scientific achievements. We welcome scientists from around the world to apply in accordance with relevant procedures.
Well, this batch represents the whole mission of the 53-day space journey of the Chang'e-6 lunar probe. Behind it are the efforts of numerous people. It also represents the new start in a space quest for all of humanity. Zheng Yibing, CGTN, Beijing.
China's Chang'e-6 is now back on terra firma with the first ever rock samples taken from the far side of the moon. As well as Chinese technology, the mission involved cooperation with scientists from France, Sweden, and the European Space Agency. So what does this mean for future lunar missions and further international cooperation in space? Joining me now are Professor Andrew Coates from the Department of Space and Climate Physics at UCL and Clive Neal, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences at Notre Dame. Gentlemen, thanks both for coming on the agenda. Now, Andrew, let me start with you. How important is the Chang'e-6 mission to the unexplored far side of the moon for lunar exploration in general?
Well, it's very important to understand the far side of the moon as well as the near side of the moon. And previous missions have looked at the near side of the moon. It looks a bit different actually to the far side. The far side is always hidden from the Earth. One of the things on the far side of the moon is a very large impact basin called the South Pole Aitken Basin. And this mission is bringing back samples, has brought back samples from that area. So that's very important in terms of understanding the formation processes of the moon, what might have been released in the collision which caused that huge basin, the South Pole Aitken Basin, which is 2,500 kilometers in diameter. So it's very interesting to bring those samples back to Earth, and now it will be possible to start analysing those in the laboratories on Earth. So overall, it really helps to understand the formation of the moon and some of the history of the solar system.
And Clive, what do you think that scientists are hoping to find out from the rocks that they've managed to bring back to Earth from the far side of the moon?
Well, this is an interesting question, because if you look at the age of that terrain, it's a very old terrain, so a lot has happened to it since that South Pole Aitken Basin formed. The lofty goals are to find mantle material, because it's such a large impact. It's hypothesized to have uncovered some of ripped off the crust and uncovered the material beneath it called the mantle. But we really don't have any idea what that would look like. We've got theoretical observations, so being able to recognize those samples is something that is going to take some time, I think. They won't just jump out as soon as the canister is going to be opened. But having them back on Earth affords us the opportunity, and this is the thing with sample return, they are the gift that keeps on giving, because future generations will be able to study these with new techniques, new precisions and accuracies in our different analytical capabilities, and future discoveries will be made. But it's also trying to understand the age of that big basin, and again recognizing impact melt from that basin is again going to be very difficult.
And Andrew, why do you think that the near and the far sides of the moon might be so different?
Well, they certainly look different. So according to previous spacecraft which have been, and of course we can always see the near side of the moon, there are some very dark areas on that, which is sort of remnant of volcanic activity in the past, the mare, and a number of the Apollo missions landed there and of course brought back samples from that area. There is bright material on the near side of the moon as well, but the far side is just about all that really white and light material. So looking at that compared to what we can see from the near side helps to give a really full picture of how the moon was formed, and getting that material from that area is very important. And I think another interesting thing about the polar regions of the moon is that there are dark shadowed craters because of the way the sun shines onto the moon. There are craters which are actually quite dark all of the time, and in those water has agglomerated, probably from comet impacts in the past. So the mission will tell us also about water on the moon as well. So that bringing the samples back actually definitely is the gift which keeps on giving. I mean, people are still looking at the Apollo samples and getting information from that. So this should be really interesting to have got material from the far side of the moon.
And yet, Clive, this is about so much more than collecting rock and soil samples, isn't it? The mission's almost a stepping stone for more ambitious space exploration for China, including, well, a lunar base, and beyond that, maybe missions to Mars.
Well, I hate the term stepping stone because it doesn't give you any long-term vision. It's just I'd say it's a building block. Okay. in achieving capability and building more complex capability. And the big thing is that human exploration of the moon is the first stage in humans becoming a multiplanetary species. It's going to take time to do this because you have to build up capability incrementally. This is what we saw with Apollo, but it was done with an accelerated pace. But in this era of constrained budgets, this is going to take more time. But what China has done in the last 15 years is to demonstrate the robotic exploration capabilities by having already landed on Mars, already done a sample return from the near side of the moon, have first nation to robotically land and rove on the far side of the moon, and the first nation to have returned samples from the far side of the moon. So there's a number of firsts there that show the build-up of capability and knowledge and technology, and the next stage will be humans on the moon.
China is investing really big in space and in moon exploration in particular. How does China's space focus and ambition compare to what's happening in the United States and elsewhere?
Well, there's a lot of ambition, of course, worldwide for lunar and Mars exploration. The moon, obviously, the US has the Artemis program, which hopefully eventually will land astronauts again on the moon, and provide the wherewithal, perhaps, jointly with the European Space Agency, to build their lunar base, again, towards the South Polar type of region. China, yes, is certainly increasing its capability, is doing missions to various objects, which have been successful. We're doing that worldwide as well. So I personally am involved in the Rosalind Franklin rover, the ExoMars rover, which is going to Mars in 2028 now, and that will be drilling underneath the surface of Mars to look for potential signs of life. So space is an international endeavor, and as we can see with the Chang'e-6 mission, there are experiments from Sweden and the European Space Agency and France on board, as well as the Chinese main sample return mission. So it is an international endeavor, and international cooperation is very important in space, and something which we can do in the various missions. And the European Space Agency, of course, is itself a big collaboration internationally, and that's why we're really excited to be involved in Rosalind Franklin going to Mars in a few years' time. So 2028 is our mission going. I should say, actually, we're looking for signs of life on Mars. So in terms of human exploration, I think the moon is absolutely fine for now. You know, this is something which we can test techniques on and do some interesting science as well associated with people going to the moon. We saw that also with Apollo. But I think for now, actually, we have to be a bit careful with Mars. Mars is the one place which is near us where life could have actually started. And so personally, I would not like to send people there for the moment. But well, let's wait until we know the answer to the question of, was there ever life on Mars? But eventually, yes, that could be a long-term plan.
We need to focus on those building blocks, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Clive, China, together with Russia, is attempting to attract countries for a joint international lunar research station, the ILRS. Bring us up to date. What's happening there?
Again, this is the issue I have with this is what if we learn from history, international competition does not lead to an enduring human spaceflight program. If you look at Apollo, it was a space race to beat the Soviet Union. It was, once Apollo 11 had landed, it was less than 4 years because it was finished, because there was no long-term vision. The neat thing about the ILRS and the Artemis in America is that there's a base of operations planned by both teams to have humans there for what they term over here sustained presence, and I think that's a great way forward. But coming back to what Andrew said about international cooperation, so space is expensive, and it is important to develop the international cooperative abilities to make this sustained so that we can have a permanent human presence on the moon. We learn from history, if it's competition, I don't think it's going to be enduring, sustainable. So I would like to see more cooperation in space to actually make that happen. If you look at the number of countries that have signed up for the ILRS, it is growing, and it demonstrates that that international appetite for the moon and beyond, but space is the next economic frontier. To create new wealth because of a new area of the world economy. And I think that's something we should all focus on together.
And Andrew, I suppose that's why, of course, there are some new players in space, some India being a prime example. How do you see that playing out?
Yes, India has had orbiters to the moon. It's had orbiters around Mars as well. In fact, it was an Indian mission which discovered the water in the craters that we were talking about earlier in the southern polar regions, and was sure as a result of that mission that there was water. So India and other players in space are also vying for position. Yes, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a new space race, but there's there's aspects of that, and we referred to the Apollo. Of course, that was the space race really sort of propelled that, because the amount of money involved in that was in the US was sort of about 5% of the US federal budget, at the time. So really very large amounts of money involved, and having the different organizations involved. But having a global view of what we need to do in space, and a global sort of scientific set of goals, is something which is in play via organisations like COSPAR. That's part of the UN, but it's an international space, not agency, but it's a place where people talk about planning new missions, and so having things complementary to each other is great, and we can see that with Chang'e-6, because actually nobody else has brought back samples from the far side of the moon, and that's a really important niche. Similarly, with Mars, with ExoMars, we're drilling underneath the surface, up to 2 meters underneath the surface of Mars. Nobody else is doing that. You need to do that to look for signs of life on Mars.
I want to come back to you, Clive, with what you were saying about this economic frontier, because space officials have talked about creating this Earth-Moon economic zone. I mean, how close is anyone really to commercialising space and its resources?
Again, we need to look at history in terms of the Earth orbiting satellite industry. This is sort of mushroomed in the past 30 years because of new commercial capabilities and breakthroughs that have been facilitated by the markets and the demand for having that capability. Right now, we're in a catch-22 with the moon because there's no market, i.e. there's no demand. So trying to stimulate that there's a number of ways you can do it. You can look at the resources there, and Andrew mentioned the water ice that's in some of the permanently shadowed regions of the lunar poles. That could be a way to create rocket fuel with hydrogen and oxygen engines. That could create a demand, but we need to understand something very fundamental, and that's to know if these resources that everybody talks about are actually reserves. And there's a lot of literature out there that uses the term resource when they actually mean reserve. And we don't know that there are any reserves on the moon, because that has an economic implication, and there's no demand for those resources. So we're at that sort of very early stage of where bold visions from a collaborative could actually stimulate that economic demand to kickstart that cislunar economy. And I think one of the fundamental aspects of sustainability is bringing the moon into our economic sphere of influence as a world sphere of influence rather than a national sphere of influence.
Well, speaking of bold visions, let's talk again about man on the moon, Andrew, because China announced last year that it planned to launch its first crewed lunar mission before 2030. What needs to happen for that to come off?
Well, China, of course, has already had astronauts or taikonauts in low Earth orbit, and have had a space station and so on. So they have launchers able to be able to do that, at least to low Earth orbit. So, of course, the development of technology to take people as far as the moon and to be able to land on the moon is another step. And of course, we've seen that with Artemis. So again, it's a stepwise approach of building up, first of all, sending something around the moon and coming back again completely without humans on board, and then doing that with humans on board and eventually landing. So it's a big endeavor, which is why it took so much of the US federal budget back in the Apollo era to actually do that. And so that's it would be a big thing. So I think Artemis hopes now to potentially land people in the late 2020s, maybe 2026 or something like that. And there will be a gateway in an orbit near to the moon as well, which would help to make that happen. And so things are being put in place to be able to do that on both sides. So China's vision to do that in 2030 also is very interesting, and eventually, hopefully can end up with collaboration on the surface of the moon, which would be great. And we saw that to some extent during the Apollo era with the US and Russia eventually collaborating in space. So maybe one of the visions one could have would be of future collaboration like that, which would be great to see.
I wonder, Clive, what are the arguments for human exploration over robotics?
Again, it's the return. You get much more with humans than you do with robotics. And Apollo is replete with examples of what I term serendipitous science, where the human eye, the trained human eye on the surface is much more productive than a robot that is remotely operated at a distance. And we see that with the sample returns. If you look at the robotic sample returns to date from the moon, there are only a few kilograms, whereas if you look at the 6 Apollo missions, it was 382 kilograms. So the science return is enabled by humans. The discoveries that will enable the economics will be enabled by humans. And I want to come back to something that Andrew touched upon about the Soviet-US collaboration in space during and after Apollo. It all started with sample returns or sample exchanges between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I'm just wondering, and this is something that I've been trying to push over in this side of the Atlantic, is that we should start exploring sample exchanges between China and the United States, because they were very productive scientifically and very productive diplomatically. Where it ended up having American astronauts on the Mir space station, for example, and so who knows where that could lead? But it's certainly something worth exploring, in my opinion.
Clive Neal, Andrew Coates, thank you both very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda, we'll talk more about space cooperation as we speak to the first South Korean in space, So-yeon.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. We've heard about Chang'e-6 and international cooperation in space from experts down here on Earth. But what of the view of someone who's actually been in space? In 2008, So-yeon became the first ever South Korean astronaut, spending 11 days in orbit and visiting the International Space Station. She joins me now from Seattle. Thanks so much for coming on the agenda. I'm so excited to talk to you. I mean, what's it like to be in space? Tell us about your experience.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for asking this question. And a lot of people ask me, what's it like in space? And then, first of all, we don't have a geography at all. So you became a Peter Pan, basically. You can fly wherever you want to go there. But one problem is you cannot stand still. You keep floating, and then all your physicals and then actions and activities are totally different from the ground. And then sometimes you are so exciting, but sometimes it's kind of disturbing to work on your own experiment and mission.
But it's not just physical, of course. This is very much about using your brain. Now, you were the first South Korean in space and were up on the International Space Station with astronauts from many other countries. How important do you think that international cooperation in space is?
Actually, and everybody knows that activity in space is really huge skills and very dangerous and also very expensive. So even any big, huge country they cannot do by themselves at all. It's international collaboration is really, really important. And everybody remember that. Maybe some of the young generation cannot know that, but even during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the United States has enemy each other, they collaborate each other with the Soyuz and Apollo mission together to docking each other and then to go beyond the orbit. So that important that you can imagine that, because no one can do anything by themselves.
Where then do you see more scope for international cooperation in space?
Yeah, that's really good idea. Good question, actually. Nowadays, a lot of commercial space activities going on. And a long time ago, we only just want to check if human can go to the space or not, or if we can touch the moon or not. But nowadays, there's a lot of interesting activities out there, even building the space hotel. And then we do a lot of communication and then TV shows and entertainment and then scientific experiment, and also even some warfares and military related things happen in space. So if we have a more diverse activities out there, I think more corporate opportunity out there, even a smaller scale of the country or some country who've never been in a space before, but they can do something little things to work together. So we have a much more and more cooperation scope in the future, I guess.
You mentioned military activity in space. Now, you were trained in Russia for your mission. And I wonder if you worry about geopolitical problems down here on Earth and how they might get in the way of the best form of cooperation up in space.
If I say no, it might be the lying. Because many of the country, either in a good relationship or a better relationship, they always have what diplomatic action is the best for them, even between the collaboration activity and project together. So my mom and dad, when I prepare for going to Russia to have a training, because they have a long time Cold War memory, several tens years ago, they worried about me because it's kind of like close to the North Korea, and then I'm so worried about you, my daughter. But when I arrived over there and then working as an astronaut and then cosmonaut with a human cosmonaut together, and then we shared our life together, and then we share our challenges together in space. So once you're getting into the space, you forgot about all other diplomatic and then political and geopolitical things, and then you should be the comrade to survive together. But when I heard about some bad news, I'm worrying about some astronauts who should collaborate together, but they still have their government down there, and they might feel awkward. But I believe all the astronauts, that they are smart enough and wise enough, they can handle it. But in the future, if we will have more people in space, and then not the government representative, but the commercial tourist, we might think about more carefully, and then we need to find some solution to resolve those conflicts each other.
Now, there's a lot of focus on the moon right now, the Chang'e-6 mission, of course, the recent India moon mission, and NASA's Artemis program as well. Where do you think all that's heading?
I always thinking about what's the difference between the 1960s, 70s Apollo and Russian mission, and now Artemis and then Chang'e-6 and Indian mission. And a long time ago, our final destination is just touching the moon, and then we want to check if human can go or not. And then that's the end. We don't think about further because we have a technology limitation. But nowadays, we always thinking about what's the next and then what we can do on the moon if we will go there. So nowadays we have an even bigger dream. So I believe the moon became a springboard. So to go further, to go beyond, we want to get to the moon first and then think about what we can do from there and what we can have more advantage from there rather than on the Earth and then territorial. So it's very exciting news to me. So regardless which country's mission at all, is a humanitarian mission. And then that's the first human mission ever, all Chang'e and then Artemis and Indian. And then I'm looking forward to have a gateway from the Artemis. I'm so excited when the Chinese people go to the behind the moon and then get the sample from there. But I'm still expecting going to the human, do something on the surface on the moon again.
Well, the Chang'e-6 mission is about collecting these samples, bringing them back to Earth for scientists to study to find out more information about the moon. But astronauts too carry out experiments when they're in space. What discoveries did you and your fellow astronauts and cosmonauts make?
And then first of all, astronauts are more improvisation and then they are more flexible on site on the moon. So there's a totally different project with bring the sample back. But thinking about your friends who go to the Italy and then bring the souvenir or some kind of memo from the Italy, or if you go to the Italy and then eating the kind of delicious Italy food and then going to the fashion show is a totally different. So it's a different scheme and different scope. So I'm so looking forward to check my friends go there and then all do the live and then official of the moon mission. That's another level of the mission, I believe.
But what about the mission that you were on? What discoveries and what research did you carry out on your mission?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's the very first mission from the South Korea. So we collecting all the brain in the South Korea, and we have all different kinds of chemical life science and then electric engineering, mechanical engineering, all different basic scientific experiments. So I should be trained for that. And then above all, we really want to care about the next generation in Korea. So I bring the tons of the educational mission to inspire and educate the South Korean students and children, and hopefully they will better technology in the future from the South Korea. So that was really meaningful.
You said before that one of the reasons it's important to collaborate in space nation to nation is because it costs so much. And I wonder if you think that people in general realize the importance of space research in spite of those huge costs.
I don't think all the people on the ground, they realize the importance of the space research, but many of the people realize that because if you have a limited resource, you should be really wise what part of the resource you should use for the current thing, and then what part of the resource you should invest for the future life. So exactly same as your family household, because you have a limited money, and then how much money you should put on your kids' education and how much money is spent for your meals and daily expense is a really important question. So I think investing in a space activity is pretty much like teaching your kids, advanced education or college tuition, kind of like that. So that is that much important for human on the moon, on the Earth.
Would you head back into space given the chance, if there's the opportunity to land on the moon or even Mars?
Of course I do. But of course, my husband always angry about that. You should talk to me first before going there and then before making decision. But I'm always ready to say yes and then raise hands.
So-yeon, pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Você tá doido, hein? Que aula, né? É incrível como que esses programas da CGTN e as conferências de imprensa aí da China estão nos enriquecendo de informação, né? Então, Alfredo, mais uma vez, muito obrigado. Comenta aí, eu quero saber o que você achou. E já manda também o seu salve aí para o Alfredo, né? Que o Alfredo merece, não é? Não é verdade, galera? Outra coisa, curte o nosso trabalho aqui, quer dar uma força pro canal? Aqui, ó. Ó, ele tá aqui, vamos lá? Ó, senta o dedão no like se você não sentou ainda. Outra coisa, você já é inscrito aqui no canal? Ah, não é? Não, então vai, amigão, vem pra cá, já se inscreve aí, tá demorando. Olha aqui o botãozinho aí, seja inscrito, inscrever, manda lá. Sabe por quê? Gente, toda vez que você interage aqui com o nosso canal, o YouTube entende que o canal é de relevância e faz o canal crescer, porque ele entrega para mais pessoas. Então, olha aqui, curtir, compartilhar os vídeos, comentar nos vídeos, você se inscrever no canal, e agora tem a nova função do YouTube, o hypar, né? Você vai ver um botãozinho aí, hypar. Quando você clica no hypar, você está pedindo o YouTube para entregar esse conteúdo para mais pessoas. Então, gente, dá essa força para a gente aí, é de graça, né? Vamos usar e vamos ajudar o canal aqui a crescer, para a gente atingir cada vez mais inscritos e divulgar a ciência, levar a ciência cada vez para mais pessoas dessa forma séria que a gente faz aqui, né? Você não curte o canal? Então dá essa força pra gente aí. Outra coisa, gosta do nosso trabalho? Que tal vir pra cá, ó, ser membro do canal Espaçonauta de Carteirinha? É isso aí, galera. Olha só, aqui embaixo ó, tem um botão Seja Membro. Tá vendo? Olhou aí, viu aqui? Tá aí, ó. Tá aqui embaixo. Pois é. Clica nele e olha as propostas aí para você se tornar membro do canal. A partir, gente, de 16 centavos por dia. Baratinho demais, né? R$ 4,99 no mês. Tá certo? A partir de R$ 4,99 por mês, você se torna membro do canal e vai ter vários benefícios. Ó, vai assistir nossos vídeos primeiro, vai poder participar do nosso grupo de WhatsApp para membros. Daqui a pouco, esse mês, a gente começa com as lives especiais aí para os membros do canal, onde a gente vai sortear brindes para vocês da nossa loja Nerd aos 50. Então tá esperando o quê, amigão? Vem para cá ser membro do canal, anda rápido, senão você vai perder todos esses benefícios bacanas aí, tá certo? Então é isso aí, galera, tô aguardando vocês lá. Um grande abraço, Alfredo, muito obrigado por tudo mais uma vez e até o nosso próximo vídeo, tá certo?